Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our session on what's new in DocuWare for invoice processing. My name is Joanne Cridell, Solution Manager at DocuWare, and I am joined here today with my colleague Bob Mutarelli, Solution Architect. And what we're going to talk about today is our pre-configured solution for invoice processing. We'll start with a short review, tell you what's new, and provide you a demonstration that will show you all the flexibility and how easy it is to understand and use. So let's review the solution. DocuWare for invoice processing is delivered with default settings activated. As you see from this chart, several settings are turned on. Duplicate invoice control, one of our straight-through processing, quick match, approvals, we have approval limits. Each of the setting options can be configurable based on the needs of an organization. Settings can be easily turned on or turned off based on one's business process. We'll be reviewing this on the following slides. It's easy to find the settings for an organization. Current settings are found quickly in the System Data File Cabinet. You can see here the default settings have been installed. It's simple to change the settings. When it comes time, you can simply change the settings. You simply run the Workflow Settings form found in the Forms tab. Just enter the new defined workflow settings and submit the form. They are instantly activated, and you can change the workflow settings at any time and multiple times. I'll review where to find these and the form in our demo. And we've made some really great improvements for a quick setup. Workflows no longer need to be copied for cost center approval process when setting up the solution. Instances for the respective cost center groups are now automatically generated within the Personnel Invoice Approval Users Account assignment in one process. In addition, the file cabinet for system data, formerly parameters, has been enhanced. Chart of accounts, account number, cost center, and optional accounts can now each be entered and maintained via their own star dialog. Invoice approvals are now made even easier. We offer two approval options. No approval. This is when an invoice will go directly from review to the completion process without any additional approvals. This works well for small organizations that the same person that will validate the invoice is also the person approving the invoice. Approvals. We have a lot of flexibility around approvals. This can easily be set up based on an organization approval policy. An invoice can be assigned to individuals for approval. The invoice can be assigned to a cost center manager for approval. The invoice can be assigned to individuals and to cost center managers. Always with the ability to divide the invoice among different GL accounts, plus setting approval dollar limits on the user or on a corporate dollar level. Let's talk about some of the new exciting features in the pre-configured solution for invoice processing. DocuWare for invoice processing now has a powerful feature around multi-subsidiaries. Based on customer feedback, we enhance the solution for companies that process invoices for several subsidiaries within one finance department. A subsidiary ID has been created in all relevant elements of the solution: the store dialog, vendor master records, personnel, chart of accounts, etc., just to keep all those records separate for recording the correct data. And the solution is set up with one subsidiary. The new version of the solution scores high points with an added feature within the GL coding table. With this version, the vendor's geocoding table data is saved and stored within the vendor master file, and the geocoding table will be pre-populated for the next vendor's invoice. When necessary, the geocoding table template can be updated for future vendor invoices. The user can also elect to leave the template empty for those vendors that do not need a pre-populated geocoding table. This new feature works best when the vendor invoices are recurring and posted to the same GL accounts or may just need some minor modifications. This is all done simply in the AP process, or you can maintain the template in the vendor master file. Truly a robust benefit for any accounts payable department, improving the efficiency and accuracy. Our chart of accounts maintain three segments. If a customer has more than three segments in their structure, modifications will need to be made during implementation. We also made some vendor onboarding enhancements. A new and improved easy onboarding form for the vendor to complete. They just enter their data, for example, name, address, contact information, payment terms, and attach their Form W-9 and submit. A new list has been created to keep track of all those pending new vendor onboarding form so you know who hasn't completed their onboarding form. You will now receive a task for the completed onboarding form and it will appear once it is received from your vendor. Just review the completed form from your vendor. You also can select an expiration date to put on the vendor record. Maybe set the vendor up for a quick match, one of our straight-through processing methods, and confirm. The vendor information now is stored in the file cabinet along with the Form W-9. And we will now start the process for the pending invoice and continue now that the vendor is now on file. We also have a new data export feature. The invoice processing solution collects the transactional data throughout the process. And a simple data export creates a CSV file to be used for posting back to your accounting system. This saves accounts payable departments a lot of time by eliminating duplicate data entry into their accounting system and greatly reducing errors using our intelligent indexing or one-click indexing, and just a few other features that will make invoice processing even better. New store dialogues for debit memos and credit memos. A new wait for documents in the three-way match process for the packing slip and/or purchase order in the validation workflow. The wait condition is a file cabinet event. The vendor number will automatically be indexed, available in all searches and including the CSV file for the data export. Well, we saved the best for last. This is big. A key innovation starting with DocuWare version 7.4 is this technology shift from a single pre-configured solution to multiple pre-configured solution. Yes, you heard that correctly. Multiple solutions in one organization. Whatever one the customer needs, one, two, or all of them. This new deployment method will give organization the flexibility of adding pre-configured solution easily to an existing cloud organization of the same version. Now let's see our solution demo on the pre-configured solution for invoice processing. You're all familiar with the DocuWare interface and how easy it is to bring documents into a doc tray from import, from scanning, or from email. So today we'll start with understanding the workflow settings. We discussed that the system is set up by default with certain workflow settings already activated. So here's the default settings. The vendor check is set to no. Quick match is set to yes, one of our straight-through processings. A three-way match is set to no. We have approval set, no data export, and the company threshold is set to 0. And I discussed how easy it is to change your workflow settings from the Forms tab using the Define Workflow Settings form. And the form is very self-explanatory. The Define Workflow Settings form walks you through each step. You'll complete your submitter information, first name, last name, your email, your organizational details, such as your org ID, and it'll show you where to find your URL, also your unique ID. And I'll show you quickly how easy we've walked this through the steps, and it's really easy to find. So from the configurations, you'll just go into the file cabinet, go into your accounting cabinet. You're going to go just into more options, and here is where you'll find your ID for that form. That's simple. You'll copy that into the form, and now this is where the workflow setting options are defined. We give you a lot of flexibility based on one's organization and many choices. Our first workflow setting option is the vendor master file verification and Form W-9 management. This feature helps avoid duplicate vendors in the vendor master file and potentially fraudulent vendors. The system has the ability to confirm if the vendor record is already on file in the vendor master file. If there's no vendor found in the file, an onboarding process can begin, which will send an email out to the vendor requesting them to click on a link to submit the online new vendor onboarding form, which I will show you, very simple for the vendor to complete. If they select no, we give them a warning to let them know that this option has been deactivated, and it's their responsibility to determine if the vendor who's submitting the invoice is valid. Our next section is around approvals. We have two straight-through approval processing methods. One is the quick match. The quick match will be a process that they will identify eligible vendors and set dollar limits for those vendors in the vendor master file. When the criteria is met, it will go directly from validation to completion. There's no other approvals in the process. Quick match is very simple to use. It's for those standard reoccurring invoices, those trusted vendors, and make them more efficient. We also have a three-way match option, and this is the automated matching of an invoice to a purchase order and a packing slip. If the purchase order amount is equal to or less than the invoice, it will have no other additional approvals needed, and it will go directly to completion. We also have several different approvals. We have no approvals. I discussed that earlier for those companies that are very small, and maybe the person that's validating the invoice is also approving the invoice. So they can select the no approval option. We also have approvals. And approvals, we have a lot of flexibility around sending them to individuals and cost centers, and I'll show you that in the personnel file cabinet. And it also can be defined on user limit or corporate dollar limits by setting the dollar limit here. We also have a feature around data export. We also provide them an option of no export, and we do give them a warning with this as well, because data export is very important to making them more efficient and reduce that duplicate data entry along with errors. If they deactivate their option, there is no export data available to upload into their accounting system. So this is an important feature to really talk to your customers about and have them understand that. Before I submit it, I have my submitter information, my organizational information, and now I'm just going to check my workflow setting options. I've selected vendor check. Yes, I want that automated vendor onboarding. I have quick match. I want to use quick match vendors to make me more efficient for those standard reoccurring trusted vendors. And I'm also using three match because I use a purchase order in my approvals. And then I'm also setting up approvals, and I'm using the individual user limits. So I've set the corporate dollar limit at 00, and I would like a data export. And all I do is submit this form, and it has told me it is successful. If I go back into my workflow settings, I will see the form I just submitted. It tells me now I'm at an advanced install. I now have my vendor check on, my quick match on, my three-way match. I'm using approvals, the data export, and I have the corporate threshold set at 0. So now that's how simple all those features are immediately activated and ready to use. That's simple. Our other sections we're going to talk about is the test data that's already in the system for you to demo. We have company records. We have the vendor master file set up. So here you'll see we have 4 vendors already established in the vendor master file. And on this one, we'll see WB Mason is set at quick match with a limit of $1,000. That means all invoices that come through for WB Mason are go directly from validation to completion with no other approvals necessary. And in here, also, we have their W-9 stored. So when we look into the vendor master file, here we'll see the company name, whether they're set for quick match, their payment type. Maybe you have an expiration date set on a vendor. Maybe it's like for a lease, a contract, and you want to make sure those vendors don't ever get paid in error. So you can set expiration dates on vendor files. This is where you would keep their address, maybe contact information, their tax ID, their terms. If you pay them via one of your credit cards, you also can house that there to keep everything separate, to make credit card reconciliation super easy at the end of the uh, credit card cycles. But I wanted to show you here in the vendor master file the company GL coding table. This is where the table is saved from when someone is entering an invoice and wants to save that GL coding for the next invoice. Or they can enter stuff into the table directly themselves by selecting, any account number that's applicable for those vendors to make data entry even more efficient and less keystrokes. Our next session we'll talk about are approver users. In the personnel file cabinet, you'll see all the test users that come with the system. We have sections for cost center groups under G&A and management. We also have the individual users that are now identified by requester limits. You'll see they're identified with limits and whether or not they're a first approver. Very easy to add a new data record for a new cost center without now going back into the workflows and creating those new cost center groups. This is a very streamlined new process. I do want to also show you the chart of accounts and how easy it is. They're identified by the subsidiary. We also, in our test data, we have just two segments. We have account numbers and cost centers. We do also have that third segment for the optional. And then if you had multiple subsidiaries within one organization, those would be identified for whatever the subsidiary name would be. We've made it very easy to identify your vendor master records, the approval users, along with the chart of accounts. So now we'll get into doing the demo for the invoices. Okay, we're going to process our first invoice today. It's WB Mason. As we talked earlier, WB Mason is set up in the vendor master file as a quick match, and all invoices under $1,000 will go directly to completion once it's met the validation. So we're going to go ahead and store this invoice. And Intelligent Indexing has read this invoice. It's an invoice in from WB Mason. It's picked up, identified the invoice number, which you can see by the highlight, the invoice date, the due date. We don't have a purchase order for this. We have the subtotal, the tax, the freight, and the amount. And we're going to go ahead and store this invoice. And we'll see what task comes up. A task has showed up, and it's a straight through to completion. And when I call up this invoice, you will see it's already pulled data from the GL coding table that was housed in the vendor master file to make data entry even easier. And all I would need to do is enter the information for the accounts that are applicable. And I'll put in my tax. And now the invoice is totally coded. Super simple. It also tells you how the invoice has been validated. It's validated through the quick match process. Approved vendor under $1,000. If the vendor invoice had different entries in the GL coding table, you have an option here to update the vendor master file. But we'll leave it as no, as we're going to have that vendor have the same GL account number most of the time. And it gives you the other index values in the invoice, just in case you need to adjust anything before submitting this. So everything looks good. It's been GL coded properly. We do not want to change the GL coding table in the vendor master file. We know it's been approved properly through the quick match, so I'm going to just confirm this. And what happens now is I have now an invoice in my ready to export list because I've set up my system to have a data export so I can import this into my accounting system. The next invoice we're going to store is US Steel. And this invoice is using our three-way match process. This is another one of our straight-through processing methods. I do want to show you just a few things around the three-way match. In the system, we have an open purchase order for US Steel. We also have a packing slip stored. So this helps us do that three-way match validation. So the three-way match, again, is the matching of the invoice to the purchase order and packing slip. It also has to satisfy the purchase order amount to the invoice amount. So we can begin our processing now. So I'm going to head and store this invoice. You'll see Intelligent Indexing has brought in all the data. And I can go ahead now and store this invoice. A task will appear. And if you notice, this again went straight through to completion. It gives me the time to also check this. It also allows me to do other options to recheck, request a new invoice, maybe reject it, or even put it on hold. But because this went through to completion, that tells me the three-way match validation all met the criteria. The 3 documents were on file, and there was enough money on the purchase order to satisfy the invoice. If there was an issue with the three-way match, say a purchase order was not on file or a packing slip was not on file, you would get a validation message for a missing documents. It will go into a wait state until one of the documents or both the documents are in the system and then continue the process for the invoice. But for today, we're just going to go ahead and code this invoice. As you can see, it's already set up from the GL coding table with some data. It has a 1GL account. So I already know that this invoice, the subtotal amount, goes to job materials. I also can select other account numbers for the remaining. I can pick tax, and I can code that to the correct department. I also can go ahead and it does the math for me, calculate the freight, and put the freight in there as well. So now the invoice has been totally coded. A little different that was in the GL coding table. I have added more lines into the table. So this gives me the opportunity, if I know, would I like to keep that GL coding table and that become the default for future invoices? So I could say yes or no. Maybe I'm not charged tax all the time or freight all the time. The people in accounts payable know what's best to keep in the GL coding table. For this demonstration, I'm going to say no to update the vendor master file, but I will show you one that we will update on the next invoice. And here we can just check everything. Everything's in place. I've been validated through the three-way match. My GL coding table's been updated, but I am not going to update the master. So I can just confirm this. This invoice will now show up in my list, ready to export. I now have both the US Steel and the WB Mason invoice in my ready to export list. For the next invoice we're going to store is Storage Experts. This Storage Experts invoice is not in my vendor master file. So I'm going to go ahead and set up Storage Experts. It has identified some of the data on the invoice already. If I'm happy with the selection, I can go ahead and store this invoice. I now have a task for vendor onboarding. I also have an option to correct the vendor name if it was entered incorrectly. But I'm going to be requesting a vendor onboarding. My system is set up for vendor master verification along with getting the W-9. I've entered my email address just to show you the process. So let's go through the process of the vendor onboarding for Storage Experts. So I will confirm. I have received an email. Please provide W-9 data. It sends an email to storage experts along with the invoice and let them know that we received their invoice, but we did not have their company information on file. All they need to do is enter the data simply on a new form. So the form is now completed with the storage expert's information. They've entered their company name, address, city, state, zip, their accounts payable contact information, name, email, phone, their payment terms. I've put on account 30 days. I'm not going to do any electronic payments, but I am going to attach my Form W-9. Now I can submit this form. It tells me the form was submitted successfully. Now we'll go back into my system. I have an open task. It's complete onboarding for storage experts. So this allows me to complete the vendor master file and to be stored in the file cabinet. So we know this system is just set up with one subsidiary. If you have a vendor number in your accounting system that's identified with storage experts or the vendor that you're setting up, this is the number you want to use. This way, if you're using a data export, the vendor numbers will match for importing into one's accounting system, as most accounting systems use the vendor number as a match as well as the name. So we'll just call this 12345 as the vendor number. We also have an opportunity to use an external vendor account. Sometimes your vendors will give you an account number. Easy to identify if you need to talk to them. They may ask you, well, what is your account number? This is largely around leases and utilities that may ask you those kind of questions. So it's already identified. The payment type is on account. I'm not using any credit card payments on this. And I do not need an expiration date for storage experts, and I'm not going to have them as a quick match vendor. So I can just say no to this. I've completed all the necessary data. I also can go ahead and now click on this and to look at the form that's been completed. I can see the completed onboarding form with the data, and I said, oh, that's excellent. And I also can see their W-9. So once you're satisfied with the onboarding form and the W-9, you can confirm. This now will store storage experts in the vendor master file. And it also automatically now starts the invoice up again to now check details. So we'll continue on with our storage expert invoice. Because we're set up for a three-way match, it's letting me know in the validation here that it failed a three-way match. It doesn't have a packing slip or purchase order. It's just for informational purposes. It also wants me to confirm its storage experts and all the information. It also gives me the opportunity, I can recheck and correct information. I can request a new invoice from the vendor. I can reject this invoice, or I can wait for missing documents. But I'm going to proceed with this invoice. Another task, I need to assign approvers for storage experts. So let's assign the invoice to approvers. There's a lot of flexibility built around DocuWare for invoice processing. We can send invoices to individuals or cost center managers. Today, we're going to select Elizabeth Cash as the approver. We have a lot of flexibility if you want to send these to multiple individuals. Say an organization has 3 people that always approve an invoice. Well, we can select 3 people here as requesters, and the first person to approve the invoice will be the approver. Not all 3 people approve the invoice, only one from the list, and whoever approves it first. We also can, in the GL coding table, provide approvers for cost center groups. I showed that to you earlier in the personnel file cabinet. So you might have a department like finance or management, and those areas can be the approvers. But for today, we're going to use Elizabeth Cash. So I'll code the invoice. And we'll just call this rent. We'll select a cost center. And that's all I need to do on this invoice. And I'm going to confirm this. Now, if I go to Elizabeth Cash's account, she should be getting a task. She has the opportunity here to approve this invoice, to reject this invoice, or if she also can do it from her mobile device. She can review the invoice and where it's been charged, and she can confirm. Her task is now completed. Now I go back into my system and I have a task for completion on Storage Experts. I can see from the stamps that Elizabeth Cash has approved the invoice. So in completion, I have other options too. I can complete the process as the invoice has been approved, but if there was ever any issues, you can recheck the invoice, request a new invoice, reject the invoice, or even put it on hold. So we can review all the data in here. The validation has been through an approval process, which has been approved by Elizabeth Cash, and then it has all the vendor information. This is all the information that's important for the data export. So I'm going to complete the process and confirm. In my ready to export list, I have now 3 items. I have my storage experts, we have my US Steel, and we have the WB Mason, all ready to export and to be imported into one's accounting system. So what we showed you today was the WB Mason invoice using the quick match straight through processing. We also showed you the US Steel invoice using the three-way match processing. And now we just did the storage expert invoice, and that we assigned through an approval to one person, to Elizabeth Cash. Again, we have great flexibility around the approval process for using multiple individuals, cost center managers, or even both. There might be times that you need to have an individual approve an invoice before it goes off to cost center managers. This happens a lot in the IT world. Maybe the IT department had ordered several computers for different departments, and he'd like to review that invoice first before going off to the cost center managers. So we've built a lot of flexibility around the approvals and hope that it will fit one's organization. Okay, I do want to show you just one more invoice, and we're going to store Phone Wizard today. This invoice I'm going to assign to 2 departments, and I'm going to save this geocoding into the table so you can see what it looks like in the vendor master file. So I'm going to go ahead and store this invoice. It's brought in Phone Wizard. It has really no invoice number. A lot of phone bills don't. A lot of times you might want to use the account number or whatever system that they use for phone bills. I'm going to enter the new charges. There's no freight or tax, and again for the total. So I'm going to store this invoice. Again, it's letting me know some standard checking information, that this invoice does not have any purchase order related to it. And that's correct. It's a telephone bill. I do not want to use any of the other options, so I'm going to confirm this. My next task is assign approvers to the Phone Wizard. So I'm going to assign this invoice to G&A, and I'm going to say I'm going to charge $400 to this invoice. I'll charge telephone, and I'm going to charge this to the finance department. I'm also going now to charge another half to management, and they will get the remainder of the invoice. I'm also going to charge this to telephone, and this will get charged to management. So now the invoice has been coded to 2 different cost centers. Everything else is fine, and I'm going to confirm. Elizabeth is under the cost center management to approve $457 of the invoice. And she agrees with that. So she can just confirm. Now we go to Peggy Jenkins. She also has a task. She has an invoice to approve. So it's been noted here, Phone Wizard has presented an invoice for $857, and she's been assigned 400 of it. So she looks at it. She sees Elizabeth Cash has already approved 457. She knows her portion is 400 for her department, which is G&A, and she confirms this invoice. Now I have a task for completion for Phone Wizard. By looking at the invoice, I can see it's been stamped by Elizabeth Cash. She's approved it. And also Peggy Jenkins. She approved it for their dollar amounts. And looking at this, I can also review. I'd like to update the vendor master. I know I get this invoice every month. Always gets charged to finance and management. And so I would like to save this in the vendor master file to save my data entry. So I'm going to say yes to update vendor master file. We also can confirm that the validation status is through the approval process. And this one has been sent to 2 different cost centers. So now I am all set to now confirm this invoice. I now receive another task. Is to update the default coding. And I definitely want to update it to help with my data entry. And it provides you the GL coding table, what it's going to look like. I'm already going to have all this data available to me the next time I voucher an invoice for Phone Wizard. So I'm going to confirm this process. I also now have Phone Wizard in my ready to export list. And I do want to show you the vendor master file. So if I go into the vendor master file and I look up now Phone Wizard, I can now see in the index entries, I have this already in my GL coding table. I have who my approvers are going to be. I have my GL accounts and cost centers. If there was any optional fields or any comments or item numbers that needed to be on there, that can be on there as well. They just have to put in their dollar amounts and they're ready to go. Data entry could not be simpler with DocuWare for invoice processing. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. You can email us at preconfigured-solutions@docuware.com. And we'd like to thank you for attending our partner conference, DocuWorld 2021.